Hello everybody, this is Jasmina, and in this video I'm going to talk about metal and how to reach the 60 kilograms of metal if you are going for that much mass, because kilograms are actually mass, um, the and in more attractive ways than barbells. And I have found that here in the US, it is very hard to find weights that still have metal visible. Almost all of them are coated with something, either to protect the metal in the barbell or to protect your floor from if you drop it. So they have some sort of foamish coating on it to make it less damaging. So I realize that it's actually getting very hard to find even barbells that meet the requirements. Maybe it depends where you are, but sometimes it's not so hard. Now, metal's purpose is to weaken the 5-yellow. This is why we do it. And this is an annual affliction that can be quite problematic. Now, if this is a room in your house that is unimportant, a bathroom, a laundry area, a storeroom, you really don't have to worry about it. But most of the time, there will be some space outside that is still in the 5-yellow sector. That's where the annual star 5 is located. That may need some treatment. Now, that could be quite small, and you might not need much metal. You kind of there's ways to judge this, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But basically, the smaller the house, even if it is in an important room where the 5-yellow occurs, the smaller or the lower amount of mass you need to cure the 5-yellow. And this makes sense because you're talking about area. So the 60 kilograms, which comes from several different sources, it appears to me to be based roughly on the average size of an American residence. Maybe it's not, but the average size in 2021, when it was at its peak, was actually over 2,400 square feet. But it has shrunk a little since that time. But this is, this is a really big house. I've never lived in a house this big. So, I'm not sure I need the whole 60 kilograms. So I would say you don't really need it if your residence is smaller. So if you have one half the size, which is closer to where kind of houses I've lived in, you only need half that weight. So that makes it easier. But it's still a lot of weight. I mean, this is most people that don't normally exercise and lift weights would have a bit of a hard time lifting this 60 kilograms. They probably could lift it, but they couldn't walk very far with it before they would really feel the strain. So, and 60 kilograms is more than I weigh. So that's a lot of weight. Now, more mass doesn't hurt. So you can choose to use 60 kilograms to be on the safe side. I would say that there's nothing wrong with that. Certainly it doesn't hurt anything. So if you want to feel secure, use 60 kilograms. Now, there are, of course, other ways to do it. Any type of metal, and this seems to be hard for people to understand. Metal is metal. We are using the element of metal to weaken the element of earth, and 5-yellow is an earth star. So that's why, I mean, because it's the star 5, the annual star 5, and star 5 is a earth star. So that's why we use metal. And it doesn't matter what kind of metal it is. They often recommend the 6, 10 kilogram weights because one, most people can lift that much, and two, they are generally relatively easy to come by. So this is why many people recommend that. Many practitioners recommend it. But there's no reason it has to be that. Metal is metal. You are using the metal to weaken the earth. So you can have metal sculptures, metal vases, metal bowls, metal anything, and it serves the purpose. Vases, of course, are basically empty on the inside, so it's just the outside part that's metal. So they tend to be rather lightweight. A sculpture, if it's made out of solid metal, can really have an impact, and it doesn't have to be terribly large. Of course, it depends on what kind of metal it is, but that can also be very hard to move around. So you have to decide on this. And if, for example, you had to move it to a kitchen, most of the time it would only get in the way. So it would be very impractical to put that in a kitchen. It's fine whether it's in a bedroom or a family room or living room, but in a kitchen it would be really hard. Now, if it's a bathroom, you really don't care, but you could put it outside the bathroom. That would be fine, in the wall right outside the bathroom. That would also serve the purpose and would be totally fine. So most people get really uptight about this. I think too many people worry too much. We're just talking about metal. Now, this much metal can take up quite a bit of space. So the denser the metal, the less space it takes up. That's physics. One of the densest, least expensive metals is lead. Now, steel is about 3/4 as dense. And I would say this one is the better one to choose. And the reason is lead is poisonous if it's ingested, so it's not ideal. So you don't want to have it around, certainly if you have kids or pets or anything like this, because on the off chance they may lick it, it's really unhealthy. Or if it's small pieces, they could actually ingest it. So I don't recommend to have lead inside your house at all, of any type. So even though it's nice and heavy and it's cheap, it's just not very safe. Steel is less dense, but it's much, much safer. That is, it's okay if you lick it, it's not going to kill you. Lead can have a very negative effect, especially on children. Now, aluminum, I don't recommend because it is so lightweight. It's about 1/3, maybe even less than that of steel. It's really very lightweight, so it takes up a large amount of space to make up the same amount of weight. There's nothing wrong with aluminum, it's just too light, that's all. Now, gold and tungsten, of course, are much denser. They're actually over twice as heavy as steel and almost twice as heavy as lead, but they're very expensive. If you can afford it, go ahead. I'm certainly not going to say no. It's metal, it works. Just that most people can't afford it. Now, you can roughly estimate how many kilograms you need by dividing your total living area, not including your garage or anything like that, but the living area in square footage by 40 or in square meters by about 3.67. So roughly. It's actually 6 and it goes on forever if you really want to know what it is. But it is it's not a bad estimate. And if you can get that much weight or that much mass, you're usually not too bad off, even if you can't put the whole 60 grams or 60 kilograms in 1 year. Because if you don't already have that metal, it can be quite hard. And of course, I've been searching for attractive ways of replacing barbells because I think barbells are quite unattractive, but still supplying the needed mass. And right now, at least here in the United States, finding barbells with metal that's bare is actually no longer easy. Almost everything is coated with something. Now, this is quite interesting. There are steel ball bearings and BBs, which are small round balls that are used in air guns. They can be used instead of barbells. Now, the ball bearings typically aren't quite as attractive as these little BBs because they're actually quite shiny and quite good looking. And you can get both the ball bearings and the BBs from Amazon. And the ball bearings may be from maybe an AutoZone or auto store, an auto parts store, maybe. We're talking about individual ball bearings, not one that's in a you know a device that is a ball bearing, which is usually what they call it. It, allows things to spin independently. Now, BBs can often be found in sporting goods stores, but it depends on where you are. If you're in the countryside, you'll probably find it very easily. If you're in the city, maybe not so easily. So it depends where you are, but they are available from Amazon. Now, because these objects are round, whether they're ball bearings or BBs, they need containment. So a bowl or a vase or something, they need to be contained or they will be everywhere. Especially the ball bearings. They're very tiny and you spill them and you will be taking weeks to find them all because they'll roll under everything. And yeah, it's a, please don't drop them. That will be a disaster. Now, covering the opening, whether it's a bowl or a vase, with something called organza, it is a fabric. If you have a fabric store anywhere near you, in fact, you can also find this online, it is a very open weave fabric. You can breathe through it easily. And you can see through it. And so you can cover, especially if you have kids or anything where you think something might knock it over, you can cover these bowls with that organza. And if you have a sewing machine, you can even sew a little pocket around like the bottom of what it's going to cover. And you can take a shoestring or something and tie it tight so that even if it tips over, it's not going to spill everywhere. That is a really good idea. And that's really good if you have kids or pets. If you only have adults, you probably don't need this. You can leave it open to the air. That's totally fine. Now, care needs to be taken. These are not choking hazards, especially for children. Maybe little dogs might also be quite a choking hazard. Most cats, they probably won't bother with them. They won't try to eat them anyway. But there is like 3/4 of an inch ball bearings that are relatively cheap on Amazon that could serve, but those are choking hazards. So this is something you really have to be careful about. And the thing is you want these containers of this metal to be able to interact with the general air in your house. So that means not behind closed doors. And that includes glass doors. That's still behind closed doors. You can tell if you look at how dusty your surfaces get in general on any horizontal surface. Look in your cabinet. Even stuff that has been there a long time is not very dusty. In fact, we usually can't even see any dust, even if you haven't used it for a long, long time. And that's because solid doors really cut off the airflow. Now, you will end up having several containers of these balls, and you can spread them around your entire 5 yellow sector. The Most people can't lift 130 some pounds. It's I certainly can't. It weighs more than I do. I mean, that's ridiculous. So I don't think I could ever lift more than I weighed. Now, most shelves, and some people don't realize this, most shelves have about a 50-pound weight limit, and that's maybe not the heavy, heavy duty shelves, but a standard shelf is about this much. And so you are not going to want to place all your objects on one shelf because you're likely to have them dump on the floor. The shelf will give way at a certain point. So spreading them out around the room, or the sector, I should say, is actually a good idea. And it is equally effective. Now, there's a fact of geometry. For any given size container, the smaller the balls, the more mass you can put inside that container. Because you have less gap between the container walls and the balls, or the spheres. So I recommend BBs. The standard size of a BB is less than half a centimeter. So they're quite small, and that's why when they roll away, they're very hard to find. And they can roll very, very far. So so you just have to be careful when you're loading your containers. Now, The 3/4 inch ball bearings can be less expensive than the same mass of BBs, but so you could use that if you want to. Now, any amount of metal helps if you can't afford the total 60 kilograms now. So just any metal is good. And I wouldn't be too worried about this. Now, we're talking about new metal added to that space. It's not metal that normally sits in the space. So even though a kitchen has lots and lots of metal, it is what you have added to the space that counts. And most kitchens are a little tight on space. Of course, if you don't cook very much, maybe yours isn't, and then it might be easy. But most kitchens, that is the hardest room to add the metal to, because they're already packed. Now, zinc or copper-coated BBs are actually quite attractive, and as a really nice way to add metal. You can fill bowls with this, and they just look really attractive. I was surprised how good copper BBs in a brass bowl looks. I mean, I'm not a fan of yellow metal, but it really looks quite attractive. Now, copper will quote unquote rust. I mean, it does oxidize. In a dry climate, it tends to oxidize to a brown or maybe a purple brown color, and this is like an old penny. It's not terribly unattractive, and it still counts. Oxidized metal still counts. Coated metal in plastic doesn't count, just to be clear about that. Now, zinc is a lot more resistant to oxidation, and if you live in a humid climate, zinc-coated BBs probably are a little better. Copper in a humid climate tends to turn green, and it can also, and that green seems to be thicker and may even make things stick together. That is, individual balls may stick together, and that's not so good. It can make actually can make it actually hard for perhaps air to get to everything else in there. And if you ever wanted to change them, you might not be able to get the old ones out unless you really smash away at it, because it can become almost like a solid piece. So it depends on whether you're humid or not, which one you might prefer. And if you keep your house at a reasonable humidity, not too, more on the dry side, copper should be fine. And copper is a little cheaper. So that's why I talk about it. Now, the only requirement of the metal is it's not coated with some sort of non-metal coating. There are plastic coated BBs out there. Don't buy those. Those do not work because there is no metal that touches the air. Now, aluminum BBs do exist, but they're so lightweight, you need a very large volume, and they aren't cheaper. So, there's no point in buying aluminum BBs. Now, ball bearings oftentimes come with sort of this oily coating, and that's because they're meant to roll, and the metal that they're made out of can rust. So they almost always have some sort of metal or some sort of oily coating on them. It might be, for as far as I know, it might just be what do you call it, mineral oil. I don't know. But if you're going to use those, you should take that coating off, that oily coating off. So this means washing it in quite a quite concentrated soapy water, and then you need to dry them immediately because they will rust if you don't. And that's why ball bearings are always packed in some sort of, well, sometimes it's silicon. Now, silicon still comes from the ground, so that's not good. You need to make sure that that coating is off of them. Again, you can get the same amount of weight a bit cheaper with the ball bearings, but they're not as attractive. So it's kind of up to you. And they still have to be in a container because they're round and they will roll all over the place. The material of the bowl or vase that you fill is actually not inconsequential. This is important. Metal is the best. We don't care what kind of metal, so you can use cheap aluminum bowls that's totally fine because you're just containing the real metal in there, the heavier metal in there. But you could use a pot, a metal pot that you're no longer using and don't ever anticipate using. You could use that. Um, there are various things. As long as it's made out of metal, that's the right thing. You want to avoid ceramic or stone because that is from the earth. Even glass is from the earth because it's basically silica and a few other things, but it largely comes from the ground. So it's also not ideal. And wood is not ideal. Now, wood will weaken metal. It will also control earth. But when you use a element that controls something as a cure, it controls it very, very quickly, but it's also usually quite painful. So this is why we use metal and not wood to uh, to reduce the issues that come with a 5-yellow. So I wouldn't use wood either. So basically it's metal. And I would say go out to your local thrift store and see if you can find any kind of metal bowls there and just buy them because they'll be a lot cheaper than new ones. But if you have to buy new, there are cheap sources. Uh, Alibaba is a pretty cheap source for metal bowls, and you can consider that. Now here we don't, it's not like we are trying to, um, like what we did with the wealth pot, where you had a higher back than the front. Well, that's not the case. This can be level. You're just looking for a bowl. So there are several manufacturers of BBs, and this is some of the ones I found on Amazon. This is actually the product that I bought. This is 6,000 BBs, and and it cost about $10. Now that's still quite a bit. They weigh about 5 pounds. Now this is the stated weight. Actually, it's less than that in the stated weight, but if these are made out of solid metal, which they very, very likely are. It should be it's just about 5 pounds for the metal inside. And I mean, I pick up 5-pound bags of flour all the time, and this seems heavier than that. Now, this is a plastic bottle, not a metal bottle, so the plastic is pretty lightweight compared to it. I didn't measure the weight of this, but it would probably be worth measuring if I buy more. Now, unfortunately, to reach that 60 kilograms, you would need quite a few bottles, and this will be rather expensive. Uh, but it may not be that much more expensive than a set of weights. But if you place them in heavier metal bowls, if you can find them, or bases or whatever, you will need fewer packages of this. And like I say, if you're in a humid climate, you probably want to use the zinc ones rather than the copper coated. And the zinc ones are a little more expensive, but then you can reuse them all the time. So that is a good thing. Now, if you already have a bare metal barbells, you don't need to replace them. I'm not saying this is something to replace your barbells, but if you want a more attractive type of metal, this can serve the purpose. So it's up to you, but there's certainly nothing wrong with using barbells if you can see the metal, and and so it's up to you. I'm not insisting on anything. Now, this image actually comes exactly from Amazon. This is what the product will look like, kind of like the first page that pops up. So that's it. I hope this was useful. I know a lot of people don't want to have barbells. Again, they are getting harder and harder to find that actually have metal that you can see. So, but it doesn't matter. This is one of the easier ways to do it. Uh, but any type of metal, you can use nuts and bolts and stuff like this. It's just not very attractive. But there's nothing wrong with doing that. I'm just giving you what I think is probably one of the more attractive ways of doing this. So again, I hope this was helpful and that it serves you quite well. Thanks again for watching.